Ann.
And I'm Mike.
And this is Unschooled History. So before we get into anything really meaty, let's get some basics out of the way. First, you're not going to get every little minor detail in one video, which is part of the reason we are doing 4.
Yeah, she talked me down. I wanted to do everything in one video, but that had been like 75, 80 hours, and who's going to sit still for that?
No, nobody's going to sit still for 75, 80 hours. Classes on the history of the Bible take up entire semesters at the college level.
Yeah.
And even 2 semesters, with one dedicated to the Old Testament and one dedicated to the New Testament.
And that's not including one semester for Dead Sea Scrolls and other minutiae.
We know this because Mike and I have both done the coursework. Especially Mike, who took classes from some of the foremost in this field of study. Big names like Dr. Matthews.
Victor Matthews, that is.
Yes, Dr. Victor Matthews. Dr.
James Moyer.
Yes, Dr. James Moyer.
And a few others.
These are people who are absolute experts in the fields of biblical studies. Dr. Leslie Payne.
Mm-hmm.
She's awesome. I took her class on literature of the New Testament. We talked about it, and she had a real papyrus plant.
Yes.
I love that papyrus plant.
Did you know I had a dwarf papyrus plant for a while?
I did not.
Yes. Before you and I got together.
Okay, so why do we call it the Bible? It actually comes originally from the Greek word biblion, which means little strips of papyrus. Hellenistic Jews then started using ta biblia to describe their sacred texts. The Septuagint and the Greek ta biblia became the Latin biblia for book, and the Latin biblia is actually short for Biblia Sacra, or holy book. Third, you may have noticed other languages on the intro screen. This is the first time we have ever included other languages on the intro screen, and this is a reflection of the fact that the Bible was not originally written in English. Duh!
Yeah.
The Old Testament was originally written in mostly Hebrew and Aramaic, as well as some Koine Greek, and Aramaic is the language that Jesus spoke.
Yes.
In fact, in a later video, you can find it online actually, but we do know what Aramaic would have sounded like.
Yes.
You can find the Aramaic version of the Our Father or the Lord's Prayer.
Yes.
So it's really cool. But we'll get to more of that in a later video. The New Testament was written in Greek and Latin.
Predominantly. There was a little bit of Hebrew and Aramaic, but predominantly Greek and Latin.
Let's see, the Hebrew and the Aramaic would mostly have been in some of the one or two of the epistles, right?
And in certain quotations.
And then, what language was the Book of Revelation in? I think it was in Hebrew, wasn't it?
I don't think so.
Or was it in Latin?
I think that was Latin.
Pretty sure it was Latin, considering the time period in which it was written. So there you go. There's the multiple languages, and the script for the Aramaic, which is the one on the right, is just so cool looking. And I have to say this, it does not directly translate into history of the Bible. The direct word-for-word translation is Bible story, if I got the translations correct. Aramaic's really, really hard. But as far as I know, the translation is correct. So, but the text is cool. I think all text is cool, but that's me, the language nerd. So let's talk a bit about the structure of the Bible. The first 5 books of the Old Testament are the Torah. They're also called the books of Moses or the Pentateuch. It is traditionally said that the first 5 books were written by Moses, hence why they're called the books of Moses.
Yes.
But we know that this is impossible, especially the 5th book, because it tells us that Moses died and was buried, and no one knows to this day where.
It would have been impossible for Moses to write that.
After he was dead and buried. And no one knows where. I mean, you'd think at least Moses would know where he's buried. Okay, so exact dates of composition are unknown, but it was almost certainly completed during the Persian period, which lasted from 539 to 333 BC. And I'd like to point out that the Persian exile is when the Book of Esther is set.
Yes.
And that book, of course, is what is celebrated in the Jewish holiday of Purim. We'll go into that more later. The Torah is followed by the prophets. And there are major and minor prophets.
Yes.
The books of Kings and the book of Judges, they are considered part of the prophets. And the prophets are followed by the poetic texts, which are Psalms, Proverbs, and Job.
Yes.
I did not know Job was one of the poetic texts until I started research for this. Did you, honey?
Yes.
You knew that.
But then again, how many courses have I taken?
Considering this was your major in college, a lot. But you also did Lord of the Rings in the Bible at one point, so you know. That was a fun course for him, and listening to his stories was a fun thing for me. So, not completed until the 2nd century BC were the next 5 books. Song of Songs, also known as the Song of Solomon, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, and Esther, which, as I said earlier, takes place during the Persian period and tells the events that are celebrated during the Jewish Feast of Purim. And the Jewish Feast of Purim is kind of cool.
Yes. It is a joyous time.
People wear masks and costumes. There's these lovely little cookies called Hamantaschen. And what does that translate into, honey?
It can be Haman's pockets or Haman's hat.
And they're little triangle-shaped sugar cookies with the edges kind of folded up. And in the middle of it is jam. Traditionally raspberry jam, correct?
No, raspberry is just my favorite.
Oh, raspberry's just your favorite. No. Michael loves raspberry.
But it should be noticed that they use noisemakers during the feast, and
every time Haman's name is said,
you drown him out.
Because Haman was an asshole. Haman was a massive asshole. If he were to go onto Reddit, onto the Am I That Asshole subreddit, and tell his story and ask, am I that asshole? Everybody on Reddit, on that particular subreddit, would be like, yes, Haman, you are that asshole. So the rest of the Old Testament was written later, but completed by the mid-2nd century BC, including the Deuterocanonical books, which were written in Koine Greek instead of Hebrew or Aramaic. These books include the books of Solomon, Baruch, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, Judith, and Sirach, and were included in the Latin Vulgate, as well as additions to Daniel and Esther and the 151st Psalm. This, of course, is why there are 72 books in the Catholic Bible and only 66 in the Protestant Bible. These deuterocanonical books are also, in large part, what was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes.
And this is not even touching on what you find in the Eastern Orthodox Bible, which also has 3rd and 4th Maccabees.
And many other texts.
And we're just not going to go into that because we are not as familiar as we would like to be with the Eastern Orthodox. But you can find study Bibles that contain it all. In fact, that was what was required for my New Testament course with Dr. Baines.
Yes. That was a very good Bible.
It was an excellent Bible as far as study Bibles go. It's not my preferred translation. I'll stick with the NAB, thanks much. Not to be confused with the NASB, which is Protestant nonsense. I'm sorry, I apologize to the Protestants out there who use the NASB, but it's a bad translation. It is. It's a bad translation. And we will be talking about that in the 4th video. Next, of course, is the New Testament. It's much easier to understand for those of us who are of the Christian faith. It is divided up into first the 4 Gospels.
Yes.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Acts. And then you have the epistles.
Yes.
Most of them were written by Paul.
Most.
But you also have books written by Peter.
Yes.
And the epistles are awesome. Because they were written to various churches. So when you see the book of Romans, it is Paul's letter to the church at Rome. The book of 1st and 2nd Corinthians are 2 letters that Paul wrote to the church at Corinth.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that's very important in understanding. And of course, after the epistles, you have the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
And the book of Revelation is a lot of fun. Because the book of Revelation is apocalyptic literature, which was a popular genre at the time it was written.
Yes, and it is not the only apocalyptic literature in the Bible.
No, it is not. What else?
You would quiz me over that when I'm trying to think.
I love playing Stump the Religious Studies nerd. People, we have stumped the Religious Studies nerd.
Okay.
He can't remember what the other apocalyptic is in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament, isn't it?
There's one in the Old Testament. I think it's Daniel, but I'm not positive.
It probably is Daniel. It's either Daniel or Isaiah. We'll have to look it up. We'll talk about it more later. It's cool, though. And it's just really not surprising at all.
No.
Because, like I said, it was a very popular genre of literature. And it's actually not talking about the future. It's talking about Rome. It is talking about Rome.
A lot of people think apocalypse means end of the world. It means hidden.
Yes, it actually means hidden. And it's actually talking about the Roman Empire. Not the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman Empire. And the mark of the beast, 666. It's not really 666.
616.
It's 616. Which is
the numerological number of Gaius Nero Caesar.
Yes. Because there is a Jewish form of numerology, and that's what Nero's full name adds up to. So it was actually all about Nero, who was famous for prosecuting Christians. So there you go. That's what it's actually about. Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yes.
But one of these things is not like the others.
Somebody's been watching too much Sesame Street.
I haven't watched Sesame Street in years. Not since my sister's kids were little.
But it's true. One of the Gospels is not like the others.
Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the synoptic Gospels,
Mm-hmm.
with similar stories in a similar order, and they have a similar source known as Q.
Correct.
There's also a two-source theory in which Q and Matthew inspired Mark and Luke.
Yes.
But when were they written? When?
Well,
okay, so what were you taught about when they were written?
Well, Mark. I think it was Mark. No, Matthew.
Mark
was written about 70 A.D. And yeah, A.D. Yeah, A.D.
Yes, A.D. Oh, and why are we using A.D. and B.C. instead of C.E. and B.C.E.? Because C.E. and B.C.E. are stupid. It's supposed to be a politically correct way to call it Common Era and before the Common Era instead of using the old-fashioned before Christ and Anno Domini. But what one singular event marks between Common Era and before the Common Era?
Christ.
The birth of Christ. So that's why many scholars are actually going back to AD and BC. Okay, so despite theories, evidence shows that Mark was actually written first. Approximately 65 to 73 AD. Matthew and Luke were written approximately 80 to 90 AD, and John was written approximately 90 to 110 AD. The rest of the New Testament, as we currently know it, was written between 48 and 110 AD. The most uncertainty is with the book of Jude, which evidence suggests was written after most of the epistles, but before 2 Peter, because the second letter of Peter, it references the book of Jude.
Mm-hmm.
But unschooled history, you ask. What's the deal with the Dead Sea Scrolls? That's what one of our fans asked about when she requested that we do this episode.
Little did she know she was getting more than one episode.
Yes. I have informed her that this is indeed going to be more than one episode. It's going to be 4. But she's fine with that because she loves learning new things. Okay, so here are some basics before we really dig into this archaeological find in the next episode. Okay, so here's the deal with the Dead Sea Scrolls. They are also known as the Qumran Cave Scrolls because that's where they were found. The scrolls have been dated as having been written some point between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century AD. They were initially discovered between November 1946 and February 1947 by a Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Ed Deeb, his cousin Juma Muhammad, and another Bedouin shepherd who was with them by the name of Khalil Musa. And the reason that there is this wide range for when they could have been written is because of the sheer number of them. The shepherds found 7 scrolls, And further excavation has so far revealed a total of 972 scrolls and fragments, which means we don't even have the complete scrolls.
No, not even the scrolls. Most of the scrolls are not complete. There are bits and pieces of them. Um, in the United States, the Museum of the Bible in Washington D.C. and the Passages exhibit, which I'm not sure if it's still traveling, have good replicas.
Beautiful replicas, actually. I mean, they're really, really nice. The scrolls are written in a mixture of Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, and cover everything from scripture, including the book of Isaiah, which the book of Isaiah is really cool because it shows just how little scripture has changed over the years. Because the Isaiah scroll, when translated, it shows that it's almost the exact same as the translations that we have now.
Yes.
At least as far as the book of Isaiah goes. And that's pretty darn cool. It also has things like the rules for the Essene community.
Yes.
And who are the Essenes?
They were a religious sect of Jews who were seen as a little extreme, and they're the ones who were responsible for compiling and writing these scrolls.
And there was actually 11 caves found. And honestly, I think this is the really cool part. Once the world is opened up to travel again, you can actually go to Israel, go to Qumran settlement and the caves, which are part of Qumran National Park in Israel. They are actually in the West Bank, which is disputed territory. But you can actually go there. It's really cool looking. I've seen the pictures. I want to go there myself someday. And I know you two do too, don't you, Michael?
Yes, very much so.
And it's amazing. You can see Essene houses.
Yes.
And it's just an amazing travel opportunity. It really is. And as you can see on the map, it is on the northwest corner of the Dead Sea. And like I said, it's in the West Bank, which is disputed territory between Israel and Palestine. But it's an amazing travel opportunity, and I would totally take it.
As would I.
And if you're like us and into tattoos, while you're there, you might as well go into Jerusalem and get a tattoo at the world's oldest continuously operating tattoo shop.
Yeah.
Which has been operating for over 1,000 years. It's where the Crusaders went and got their tattoos. It's kind of cool. Alright, so that's it for part 1. Tune in next week for part 2, when we are going to go more in depth into the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we'll also talk about another artifact you may not have heard of, called the Copper Scroll. Not to be confused with all those copper pans and clothing things on TV. No, the Copper Scroll is just a really, really cool artifact that they took forever to unroll because it was so delicate. But we will be talking about it. As always, thank you for watching. If you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. And also, if you haven't yet, make sure that you like our Facebook page. That way, you can also get a daily history fact and every Friday, a Creepy Friday fact.